Hi, my name's Helen and I'd like to welcome you to this online workshop looking at landscape artwork and welcome you on behalf of Heritage Learning and the Ferrans Art Gallery. So during this workshop we'll be doing several things. There'll be lots of discussion and questions, and during this time I'll probably ask you to pause the video so that you can talk amongst yourselves, share your ideas with your friends and your teacher and discuss those ideas. And then we'll also have some time where we're studying some of the landscape paintings from the Ferrans Gallery. I will do some demonstrations of techniques that will help you, so that finally, the final thing that you'll do in this workshop is that you'll create your own piece of artwork, landscape artwork, where you'll be able to show everything that you've learned about today. So I'm sure that you'll enjoy it, and I'm sure that you'll be looking forward to developing and creating your own piece of original artwork at the end of this. So just take a few moments now and close your eyes. Forget about everything that's around you, relax and imagine that you're outside in a landscape. It might be somewhere that's special to you. Perhaps you've been there on holiday with your family and friends. Maybe it's somewhere you'd like to be, but you've never really visited in real life. Put yourself into that landscape now, and what can you see? Think about what physical features and human features you can see, and what you can hear. What can you feel? How do you feel? Perhaps you're lying on a beach. Can you feel the warm, soft sand underneath your body? Can you hear the sounds of the gentle waves lapping up onto the sand and then returning to the beautiful blue ocean? Feel the heat of the sun on your face and its glow through your closed eyelids. Listen. Can you hear children playing, adults chatting and laughing, maybe bird sounds as they fly overhead across in the bright blue sky? Or perhaps you're in a woodland, or looking out across fields or mountains. You decide where you want to be and enjoy being in that place for a few minutes. When you've done this, open your eyes and share some of your chosen landscapes with your class. Where were you? What was there? And how did you feel while you were there? So pause the video now while you try this experience and discuss it with your class. Welcome back. I hope that you're feeling really calm and relaxed and in a great place now. And we're now going to have a look more closely at a couple of paintings that I've chosen from the Ferrans collection, a couple of landscape paintings. And so once an artist has chosen the scene and thought about the features that they're going to paint in their landscape, they start to think about the composition of that scene. And when I say composition, what I mean is that they think about how the scene is organised, what they have in the foreground, and the foreground of the painting are the things that are closest to the artist, and then what sort of features they can see in the midground, and finally, what are the features that are seen in the background, furthest away from where the artist is viewing the landscape. We call these things the perspective of the landscape, and it gives, perspective can give something that is flat, a piece of artwork that's created on a flat plane, a feeling of depth, or make it feel more three-dimensional. And so what we're going to have a little think about when we look at these paintings is what techniques the artists have used in order to give their paintings this feeling of perspective, this 3D feeling, as though it's got a foreground, a midground and a background. So I want you to look closely for some of these techniques in the paintings that I've chosen. Now let's look at some landscape paintings from the Ferrans Art Gallery collection. The first one is of Holland Village, which is in Holderness, not far from us. It's by an artist called George Cammage. He painted between 1846 and 1915. I've put some questions up for you to discuss about this painting. pause the video and have a talk with your friends and your teacher about these questions. This next painting is in the Lake District. Some of you may have been to the Lake District. It's of Sedbergh Fells in Cumbria and was painted by Delmar Harmoud Banner a little bit later than the previous painting. It's also in the Ferrans Art Gallery. I've also written some questions for you to discuss about this painting. You might like to think which one you prefer and why that might be. Okay, so now we're going to have a look more closely at some of these perspective techniques that artists can use, and you're going to learn some of these techniques, have a go at them, so that when you create your final landscape piece you'll be able to show perspective in your own artwork. So what I'm going to do in a few minutes is I'm going to demonstrate. I'll do 3 short demonstrations of 3 different techniques that help to create depth and a sense of distance in a landscape. I want you to watch the demonstrations first. You might watch them through a couple of times, and then you're going to work in your sketchbook. Now, some of you might already have got a photograph of a landscape that you're going to use to work from for your final piece. If you have, then I'd like the work you do in your sketchbook to be based on your own chosen landscape. If you haven't, don't worry, you can use mine and you can just copy the examples that I create, okay, and just do them yourself. So watch them through a few times, because what you learn in this next session is really going to help to prepare you for creating something that you feel is really successful as a piece of landscape artwork that shows depth and perspective to it. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to demonstrate to you is mapping out the scene of the landscape on your piece of paper, and we're focusing on making sure that it looks as though it's 3-dimensional, as though it's got distance to it. So the first key thing that I want you to think about is what we call the horizon line, and that is the line where the sky meets the land or the sea if it's a seascape. Now, I think it doesn't look good if you get that exactly halfway in your paper. It works much better if the sky is in the top third or the sky has 2/3. I'm going to give my sky about 1/3 of my page, and I'm just going to put 2 little marks to show on either side where my horizon line is, and they should be the same distance. Then what we need to do is start with our foreground. If you remember, the foreground are the features that are nearest to the artist or nearest to the viewer. So my foreground is going to start with some long grasses that are blowing in the breeze from this corner, and I think I'll put a young tree in here as well. Now my outlines are really quite strong so that you can see them. If I was doing this in preparation for a piece of artwork, I'd be trying to make my outlines as light as I possibly could. So I'm just going to start mapping in a few things. I'm not going to finish it off. I'm just going to give you an indication of where some of the leaves would come. This is just a sketch, okay? So my tree is pretty, taking up quite a lot of the space on my page, and the grasses around it. Okay, right, now the next thing that I want is I'm going to have a river flowing through my my landscape. So it's going to start in this bottom corner, and it's going to make its way towards the centre, and then it's going to start behind the tree in my very foreground, and it's going to weave its way
to about here, and that's where we're not going to see it anymore. I'm putting a dot so you can see it. We call that the vanishing point because my land feature on the other side is going to cross that. And so this is all the river here flowing across this way. And where it disappears is where what we call the vanishing point. And it disappears into the distance. You can't see it anymore once it gets past that point. And this could be a road that has a vanishing point. It could be a path. It could be a stream. It could be a line of trees or a fence. It's where it begins quite large in the foreground and then it vanishes. Now, my midground is going to be made up of some hills and fields, and I'm now going behind my tree and I'm going to take it that way, and then I'll have another field coming from this side. Now I'm getting further and further into the background, and notice that my hills, my fields are getting smaller. So these features are getting much, much smaller as they disappear into the background. And if I were to put some trees in this background, probably all you would see was a few tiny, I'll press on so you can see them a bit better, little patches of woodland, and they would be fully grown large trees. But they look tiny compared to this tree, which we've got in the foreground. So just to recap, you've got the foreground where you begin, and the size of the features in the foreground is large. The tree actually spreads right across the page. If you're having a feature such as a river or a stream or a road or a line of trees, they're going to disappear. They get smaller and smaller until they disappear at the vanishing point. And then the other features, the fields, the hills, the mountains, start to decrease in size through the midground right down into the background. Okay, so now we get to think about another dimension of helping us to make our artwork, our landscape artwork, look three-dimensional. And it's the way that we use our colour. I'm going to add colour to the pencil sketch that I previously did. I don't recommend that you do that. I recommend that you actually sketch it out in the coloured pencils. For example, this landscape is predominantly, I suppose the theme will be green, so I would perhaps sketch it out with a very pale green outline. But just so you can see how it's developed, I'm going to work on the same pencil sketch outline that I did before. And I'm going to start in the background and I'm going to work forwards. The reason I'm going to do that is because the foreground overlaps the background. And it's much easier to do that when you're colour blocking by starting in the back and coming forward. Now, what we know about colour, if you look, and you can just look outside the window and notice this, is that colours in the background become more greyish. They have more grey tones to them. They fade. So the way we use our sketching pencils, we're just going to much more lightly. Now you can see why you don't want a sketching pencil outline, because I'm not going to be able to cover that and make it disappear. So my fields that are really in the background, I'm using my coloured pencil on the side so I can control it nice and softly and get the different tones. Again, I can put slightly different shades of colour in there, but I'm just very lightly mapping those in. I might even have a little bit of yellow where there's a bit of golden sunlight shining on those fields. Now that's my very distance there, and my distance is going to sort of fade into my sky. So I'm also going to put a little bit of one of my green, very light green tones into the sky, and then I can start to blend that in with some of my sky tones. Now when we're looking at the sky, where the sky meets the land, and we've already established that that's what we call the horizon line, that's where the sky is furthest away. So where the sky is at the top of your paper, it's nearer to you. So the colours appear brighter and they fade gradually down towards your horizon line, which is your distance. Okay, and then I'm going to move further forwards across the land. So my next block of fields, my colours are going to be a little bit stronger. So I'm going to press on a little bit harder. And those colours appear a little bit less grey. So it might be that I add something a little bit more bright to the colours. What have I got here? Put a little bit of this green in, see how that looks. They're just starting to appear a little bit more colourful as they come closer to us. Notice that I'm not going to colour anything in one solid block of colour, because that's not really how things look in the natural world. So I've mixed a whole range of greens for this field, and I'll blend them together. And I would continue doing this so that my colours are getting more and more vibrant as they come across into the mid-ground. And then let's have a little look at the foreground. So if I go back to my tree, I'm now actually putting quite a lot of pressure on the pencils, and if it was paint that you were using, your colours would be much stronger, less grey, or if it was watercolour, less water in it. Even coming right up into these branches, because remember, this is close to us. It's all part of the tree here that's really quite close to the artist or the viewer. So my colours are much more strong and vibrant. And it starts to look as though it's nearer to you. Okay, and the same with the grasses. If I then go on and I'm looking at the grasses here, these are where the brighter colours will come in. Again, you can see now that it really isn't a good idea to have a pencil outline. However, if these outlines of my grasses had been in the grass type colours, then they'd have disappeared by now. You wouldn't be seeing them. So you wouldn't be thinking that doesn't look right for it to be like that. Okay, so if we just quickly recap what we've done here, we've started in the distance where the horizon line is. That's the furthest away piece of sky, and it's the furthest away piece of land. It's the colours are far lighter tones, so they're greyish versions of the colours that you're using. As we come through into the mid-ground, these colours get a little bit stronger. And then when we come right through into the foreground, the colours are definitely at their most vibrant. And all of this tree, remember, is the foreground. So I would go on and add stronger colour to the tree and any of the leaves here that were falling. Okay. Look closely at the next few slides. They're all landscape paintings by different artists. See if you can see how the colours fade and the tones fade into the background. See if you can identify that in the foreground things are much stronger and much larger in shape. And see if you can see where any vanishing points are, taking your eye back into the distance. Okay, so
now is the time that you're going to put everything that you've thought about and everything that you've learned in this workshop into practice, because you're going to create your own landscape piece of artwork. Your teachers might have decided what media you're going to do that in. It could be paint, it could be pencils, it could be pastels, chalk pastels maybe, or even collage. But what I want you to do first is I want you to think carefully about both the physical and the human features that are in your piece of work. I want you to think particularly about how you're going to show depth to it. So you're going to show perspective. You'll have a foreground, you'll have a midground, and you'll have the background, and we'll feel that depth as we look at the painting. I also want you to think about the kind of mood and emotion and feelings that you want the person who looks at your landscape to feel. Okay, so things that you might do to help create a mood is think carefully about the kind of colours, maybe the season or the weather that your landscape's going to have in it. Think about how you're going to maybe create texture, because that can help create a sort of feeling. All soft, smooth textures give us a calm, peaceful feeling, whereas if you're using really thick textured paint and maybe some collage on there as well, then that might be good if you're creating something that's quite stormy and maybe makes you feel a little bit anxious or frightened even. Okay, so think about those things. Think about the atmosphere that you want to have in your painting or your artwork. And then before you start, you need to plan it out. So just in the same way that we did when we sort of sketched out the lines to show that the features in the background get smaller and smaller, you're going to sort of sketch it out on your finished piece to start off with. Now, when you do this, I always say that it is best to do the sketched outlines in the same media that you're going to use to create your piece. So if you're going to create your piece out of pastel, then use the pastel to sketch in the features first. And this is because if you use something else, if you use pencil, it can sometimes be really difficult to cover it over, to disguise it, because in real life we don't have outlines around us, do we? We just have edges. And when you do this also, think about the colour that you're going to use for your outline. I would suggest that you use a colour that is very, very close to the colour of your page, because then if you want to change anything or work on top of it, it'll disappear, it won't show through, okay? The worst thing you can do is end up with a really strong line around the outside of everything. So once you've got all of those things planned and mapped out, then you're going to really work on developing that landscape that takes the viewer and yourself into a different place. So they feel like they're really there and they can think about what it would be like to be in that place at that time. Okay? So enjoy your creations, and I'm sure that they will be wonderful. And then the final slide that I'm going to leave you with is an evaluation slide, because I think it's really important as an artist that when you finish doing something, you sit back and you think about it, you talk about it, you explain what you were trying to do and how you were trying to do that. And then also you might think, well, I've really learned this and this is really important and I want to remember this technique because I want to use it again when I do something else. Or I think next time I would change it slightly. So when you've finished creating your pieces, show them to each other and have a little look at the slide that has the evaluation questions. So thank you very much for joining us in this workshop, and enjoy being creative artists. Thank you.